Good morning and welcome to week 8. My name is Dr. James Deitch and I'm here today to discuss with you the focus on the historiographies of race, women, and gender that began really to take traction in the 1960s. This subject provides a much needed addition to history as a discipline, and these historiographies have continued to expand and splinter into subgroups. Discussions of these topics and historiographies will require judicious definitions and careful explanations. Can't emphasize that enough. By telling these stories, you bear a great responsibility to get it right. So it's very important that you define your definitions very carefully and be very precise in how you tell these stories. Be a good tenant of these stories. This week covers challenging methodological and political topics. And it's important to treat the topics thoughtfully and each other respectfully as you approach these discussions. Historians of race, women, and gender examine and interpret heretofore unexplored topics. Traditional, scientific, or even progressive historiographies may mention women or race, but none of these older approaches to history could grasp the questions asked by historians of race, women, and gender. The older historiographies certainly did not have any answers to those questions. And the older historiographies are not necessarily conscious of race or gender. They may mention them, but they certainly don't focus on them. As history and historiography, race must be understood in part of a social or a cultural construct. Now, this word construct deals with how people in any given group, in this case a racial group, lived in the world and experienced the world. Misunderstandings can certainly occur, which is another reason to be so precise and judicious in writing about the history of race. The same can be said for the historical study of ethnicities. Over time, the historical studies of race have expanded to include indigenous peoples, as well as racial and ethnic groups from Europe, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Women's history emerged as a subfield of history in the 1960s, asserting that women did have a history and that history should be studied. And this first phase of women's history used some of the same methodologies and techniques that social historians have used. Over time, women's historians increased borrowing methodologies from anthropology, archaeology, sociology, literature, and other fields. But it did not take long before women's historians began to assert the importance and centrality of women to American life in general, which is a fair assessment. In the 1960s and the 1970s, some women's historians embraced feminist history. This paralleled the women's rights movement and the push for an equal rights amendment. Feminist historians rebelled against what they see as men's control of history and historiography, and they see this control as an aspect of patriarchy in society. Now, I want to caution you that as you approach this, you don't need to take that methodology and you don't need to take that approach to it. Certainly that was important to the time, but the greater body of work of history can encompass so many different things. I'll give you a great example. My area of specialty is colonial America with a specialty in the Mid-Atlantic states. So I've studied all of the founding fathers. But I wrote an article for the Journal of the American Revolution that featured Mercy Otis Warren, the wife of James Warren. A woman of tremendous influence, wrote one of the earliest histories of the American Revolution. She had the ear of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and Abigail Adams and Martha Washington. Great influence, and wrote quite extensively on that. So there's an example of somebody whose story may not have been told in the past, but is certainly integral to understanding what was going on in colonial times in our country. So we've got to make sure that we understand, study, and certainly present these stories. So by the 1980s, gender historiography began to grow. Gender historians believe that femininity, for example, does not occur in a vacuum. To understand women's lives in the past, there's also a need to understand men's lives and masculinity in the past. So here's a moment to note a historiographical trend, specifically in military history. Traditional military history dealt mostly with operational aspects of warfare, including strategy, tactics, and leadership, as well as unit and institutional histories. Since the 1980s, military historiography has encompassed larger trends in historiography to consider social and cultural themes, as well as race, gender, and many other topics. So this historiographical school is dubbed the New Military History, or War and Society. Such themes are so integrated into scholarship that we could even say that it is all just simply military history. And that's a trend that we're starting to see, that social histories must integrate all parts of society to be a complete retelling of history and the stories that go alongside it. I hope you enjoy this week. I think you will find that some of the characters and stories that are emerging are fascinating, and perhaps this will afford you the opportunity for some ideas towards your capstone and work that you may produce in the future on these subjects. Thank you for spending the time with me this morning.